further ado, please welcome the legendary, and I do mean legendary, Simon Kirke. And there he is.
Hello.
Simon, good to see you. Thanks for having a busy day, it looks like.
Well, yeah, everything sort of snowballed at once, but and the pest control just arrived, so that's why I'm a little late. So my apologies.
It's quite all right. Yeah, no, you kind of bailed me up because it's live, and I was trying to think on my feet, and
no, it was my fault, and I have a rodent. It's up in the ceiling, and it's scrabbling around. It's the weirdest thing. But anyway,
I'm sorry about that.
The perils of owning a house, but it's lovely. It's a lovely, lovely peril. Anyway, good to be here.
It's good to have you. Thank you, and thank you for doing this. I was just talking to the folks watching at home about the Heyman kit, and I said, I'm going to talk to Simon about that. I know you played Heyman drums. Sorry if we'll just jump in. I know you played them during your time with Free,
right?
And did you use them in the early part of Bad Company as well, or had you moved to Ludwig?
No. Well, on orders from John Bonham, when Bad Company signed to Swan Song, of course they're owned by Zeppelin, and John kind of took me under his wing, even though he was a month older than me, just only a month. So, but he became sort of a big brother, and I'd switched from Heyman. I don't know what the story was, but I got a Ludwig kit, a super classic kit, in the first early days of Bad Company. And when John saw it, it was like, oh, what's that piece of shit? You want to get a 26-inch. I don't believe I had a 22. It was a small Ludwig kit, but he was, bombastic. He was like John was like his drums and his drumming style. He was larger than life, and he a charming bully, but a nice bully. And he said, "Look, you got to get bigger drums," because he had this, the 26-inch bass drum, which I'd never heard of before, and a 14x10 rack tom and 18x16 or 18x18 floor. It was an enormous kit.
Yeah,
which he didn't need, of course. He could make any kit sound big. But anyway, I switched to I have it in next door. I got the original Bad Company kit. And the Heyman kit languished in Paul Rogers' studio for years and years. And unfortunately, it's no longer playable. It looks a little bit like those photos from the Titanic.
You mentioned that, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of rust and corrosion, but I loved it. It was a lovely kit.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I was going to ask you about John, and I was going to sort of work my way into it, but I'm so glad you just dove in with that, because I knew you had a history with Bonzo, and I didn't realize he was the one that sort of took you under his wing, so to speak, and with the Ludwig situation, and
sure.
And the same with Peisty, or had you already?
I believe John. Yes, he did use Peisty, but I remember him saying, he said, "I'll call up Bill in Chicago," because there's a waiting list. Back in those days, you couldn't just go to a guitar center and have it the next day. But I remember apparently he called the actual factory and said, "Hey, I want a kit sent over for my mate," and I believe it came over within a week from Chicago, Clear Customs, and it was this beautiful black 26-inch, the whole 9 yards, courtesy of Bonzo. I mean, because he was the spokesman, whether they liked it or not. He played Ludwig, and Zeppelin were a pretty big band, and whatever he wanted, he got. So
and you always played a 4-piece kit, right? Did you ever play 2 floor toms?
Yeah, I sort of dabbled. Primarily it was 4-piece. I've played around, dabbled in a twin bass drum after Baker, Ginger, and back in the late 60s, I had this band called Maton's Magic Mixture. and tried two bass lines, but I could never get the hang of it, and had a couple of floor toms, but it was always the four piece really.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't need, I sat behind Nico McBrain's kit, once we were on the same bill, and he had this enormous array of drums, and he could play it. I mean, that was Nico's style.
Yeah.
Sat behind Mooney's kit, and it was like, fucking hell. I was like, what? I said to Keith, are you having a drum sale? He said, no, dear boy. What did he say? Dear boy. He always called me dear boy. He had this affected aristocratic, oh, dear boy. I use this second floor tom just to put my drinks on, but John could play a double kit. He was, Keith Mooney could play a double kit.
Yeah.
Beautifully. He was an amazing drummer. Yeah.
Yeah, he sure was.
Yeah.
Man, what a time. I know you guys are all, as you say, you just a little younger than Bonzo, and Keith, I think, was a couple of years older than you guys, born in 46, maybe.
He was a youngster. I mean, I can tell you now, he was a baby in the Who. I believe he was only 19. Maybe he was. I'll tell you now.
I remember when he passed in 78, hearing that he was 32. That's where I sort of got the.
Okay, well, I stand corrected. You're right. He was born August 23rd, 1946. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, right. But I mean, you guys all came up at the same time, and I was just going to say, what a time to grow up in London in the 60s and just be in it, right? I mean, what was that like to be like Free started around 68?
Yeah, we started in 68. Well, look, I've maintained for years and years that decade when the Beatles came on board around 64 to 74, before disco and punk came in and torpedoed everything. You got those 10 years. And really, the most formative of those years would be around 66, 65, let's say, to 70. Those 5 years, you had Zeppelin. I mean, you had Deep Purple. You had, I guess you could, you had us. The Beatles were coming to prominence. Obviously the Stones have always been around. So many bands. It was just a golden age of music, and I don't really know that there wasn't one specific element that prompted all this. I maintain that there was so much going on in the world back in the mid to late 60s that this was just a reflection of that. You had the Vietnam War, you had women's lib, you had the civil rights movement. There were three big movements going on, three big worldwide events, that were taking place. And I think the golden age, the hippie age, if you want, drugs, psychedelic drugs and marijuana. I mean, there's so many things. No computers.
Yeah.
I think computers are a real double-edged sword when it comes to music, because on one hand, you can write something, put it together, and have it all around the world in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, it tends to dehumanize music to a degree, I think, Yeah. So there were no computers back in those days. I don't know. It was just a golden age of music.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was born in 1960, so I was just sort of getting into music at the end of the 60s. I mean, in a real way, and I just remember thinking, even at 10 years old, like how great it was that you had all this music on the radio, like and now looking back at it, I look at it as really the golden, as you say, the golden age of it all, and you had all these bands, roaming the earth, so to speak. Well,
you also had what I call the great crossover, and that was in the mid to late 60s. You had the blues boom in England and Europe, where blues artists who really couldn't get arrested in America. They had to come over to England and Europe and play all the colleges and universities and so on and so forth. And then, on the other hand, you had the British invasion, spearheaded by the Beatles, obviously. So you had this sort of crossover where English bands came over to America to get big and popular. And we had a lot of American artists who came over, and we loved the blues. I mean, we grew up. Free primarily was a blues band, a little off the wall, because although we played several blues standards, Crossroads, 4 o'clock in the morning, Going Down Slow, we started to branch out and write our own blues-based music. Same with Zeppelin. I mean, Zeppelin was slightly guilty of a little bit of plagiarism here and there, but they did cough up the money in the end.
Yeah.
But they were an amazing blues band, and Cream, an incredible trio, raised on the blues, and
Yeah. There's a note from a gentleman that you've met before. Anthony Cucina said, we met back in the 80s when you and Peter Frampton came to my drum shop in New York to borrow a snare drum.
Sounds like me.
Yeah.
Did I give it him back?
No, I'm sure you did.
I hope I did.
My question to you is, what are you focusing on musically these days to improve your overall musicianship?
Well, you never stop learning, do you? It's always a work in progress. Right now, during the lockdown and whatever, Bad Company hasn't worked for 2 years. I do believe we're going out on the road next year, thank God.
Oh, fantastic.
But I play piano and guitar as well as drums, which drums are my first love. But I'm getting into movie scoring at the moment. Just a little independent. I'll never be in the realm of the John Williams and the Alexander Duplat. That's not my thing, but I've always loved listening to movie music. So I'm doing that. I'm writing songs all the time. I've got a lot of material, probably be doing another solo album next year as well. So wow. Yeah, I'm keeping busy.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah,
congratulations. Yeah, fantastic. And I'm going to just jump backwards for a second. I remembered the chat we did a few weeks ago when we had the big group, the little Remembrance for Charlie, and our friend Greg Bissonette mentioned our good friend Greg.
Great drop. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know. He mentioned that when you recorded the original sort of version of All Right Now, you were playing eighth notes on the hi-hat.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it was, so I'm just curious to just know how that sort of.
That's a great question, because when we started it, I don't think I ever played any songs. I was a lot younger then, obviously, and it wasn't a question of saving my energy, but playing eights after a long time just didn't feel right. It felt a little constricting. Mm-hmm. And I was very much enamored of Zigaboo Modalis with the meters. Yeah. And I remember hearing, I believe it was Look a Pie Pie, one of the famous meters tracks. And he was doing this do bum 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 ba ba bum 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 bum, and he was doing ba 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 ba, just fours on the hi-hat, and it just sort of stuck in my head. So when we'd done All Right Now in rehearsals and in sound checks, I'd always played eights, and on the live album Free Live, you'll hear before we actually recorded it, I did a version with eights on the hi-hat. But anyway, getting back to the recording of it, and I remember it so well. After about 3 takes, I thought, you know what, I'm going to try this. So instead of dun 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 dun, I did dun 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 dun, and I could do these little hiccup, what I call little hiccup strokes on the left hand on the snare, and it worked really, really well. It also allowed me to be less economical with my energy, because I believe we did this song about 20 times with false starts and so on, and breakdowns and whatever. So I believe we used take 6. It just sticks in my head.
Wow.
But there was just something very freeing about playing 4s on the hi-hat, and I do it to this day, and we still play the song, and I love playing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and when you guys were talking, when you and Greg were talking about that last time, you know, I'm gonna have to I'll download the live version and
Yeah,
listen to it. Yeah,
it's interesting. It's a different feel entirely.
it must be, because I can only hear that song,
Yeah.
you know, that way. It's such a, I mean, I can't even put into words what that song is. It's an institution, you know. I mean, it's like one of those songs that all us drummers, you know, of a certain age, like it's one of those songs that you start off playing. It's just the groove is so contagious, infectious, you know.
Well, I'll let you into a little secret, because I think it was kind of born or influenced by Honky Tonk Woman. I remember sitting in Paul Kossoff's apartment, and I lived with him for several months. And of course, we were young, we were listening to all songs, all sorts of things. And I remember Honky Tonk, and that was in open G. And Keith didn't have a bottom E string for all the guitarists out there. He had open G, and he started with this bam, 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 and that lovely that sort of tumbling into the beat that Charlie had. And that kind of thing stuck in my brain subconsciously. I never consciously copied anything, but All Right Now became this anthem, really. And whenever and wherever we played it, it just went down a treat. But I am regretting to this day when the guitar solo comes in, because I'm doing that running thing on the snare. And that's hard. That's a really hard thing to build and build and build.
Absolutely.
Because the solo, goes over, I don't know, 64 bars, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I always think, why the hell did you why did you do that, man? But it's worked for me, and I love the song.
It's great. You know, it's one of the first songs I can remember. And again, I'm probably I'm dating myself, obviously, but in 1970, listening to it like in my dad's car, radio, little cheap radio in the car. One of the first songs that you could really hear the bass drum. The bass drum was so out front, as opposed to records that you heard on the radio in those days. And I just remember like not even realizing the effect it had on me. It created this driving, pulsing groove, and when you're like 9 or 10 years old, you don't really understand what it is until later, and you go, that's so cool.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. I remember at the time, Cream were huge, and I always thought that Ginger's drums are always mixed very badly, and way back considering his kit, his bombastic style. The Cream, the studio album, not the live one, Wheels of Fire, is incredible. One of the great live albums. But I always thought that his drums were way in the background. And the first couple of albums of Free, I always felt the drums were just a little back in the background. So for the first time on Fire and Water, which is the album that All Right Now was taken from, I was in on the mixing sessions, and I, maybe when the engineer wasn't looking, I would just sort of inch up the bass drum fader, because I was in love with James Brown, the band, and I always, that doom, what they call the downbeat, was so important, because it was a springboard for the rest of the rhythm. When you've got that doom, boom, 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 it's like if you don't have a real good solid downbeat, you won't have a good backbeat. So when we came to mix All Right Now, I made sure that you could hear the kick drum, and I love it. Yeah,
really, yeah. And it sounds, when I listen to that now with a real critical ear, it sounds like you're playing the front head on the bass drum too. You can hear a little bit of residual boom to it. Is it?
I think it was because I remember having a conversation with Bonzo, who stubbornly refused to take off the front head,
Yeah.
and he would cut a little hole. That was his, that's what he would give the engineer, and that was it. And I think I did the same, because when you take the whole front head off, it tends to emasculate the bass drum,
Yeah.
because a bass drum is a bass drum, and you're going to have a little bit of air going back and forth between the batter head and the front head. But I remember we did cut a little hole for the mic, whatever the mic was. Yeah.
It's a great sound. And you had also mentioned that it's Paul Rogers playing the clave part on that song.
Why do I remember that? It was 50 years ago, but yes, I was playing maracas. He was playing the clave, and then me and Andy Fraser, we were on our knees behind a Hammond organ on the bass pedals. Right at the end, you'll hear these big octave A's, and it's he's taking one end of the foot pedals, the bass, and I'm taking the top. Oh, okay. The things we did, But who knew it was?
And those percussion parts were played. So Paul's clave was overdubbed later. It wasn't like during the rhythm track. He
no, it was done later. Yeah,
it's done later. Yeah. Wow. And then so fast forward to Bad Company, which was like a year after Free disbanded, right? Basically, you and Paul.
Yeah, I mean, Free finally ground to a halt in early '73. So we had 5 years, and we had a couple of lineups and a lot of problems with drugs, and dear Paul Kossoff, finally succumbed. And then I went away. We just sort of exploded, and Paul Rogers went off somewhere. I went off somewhere. And then I called him up a couple of months later and said, hey, what are you doing? And he said, well, I've met this great guy, Mick Ralphs, from a band, Mott the Hoople. And Mott the Hoople were on Island Records, like Free. So we'd seen each other in the offices. Hey, man, how are you? La, la, la. Yeah. And I always liked him. And he said, Paul said, well, he's leaving Mott. He's a bit disenchanted, and he wants to form a band. Would you want to play drums? And I said, I'd love to. I've always loved Paul singing. We always got on well. So that was in maybe March '73. And then we spent, 4 or 5 months looking for a bass player. And then we finally, got a guy, Boz Burrell. Yeah. And called up Peter Grant. I mean, I'm kind of thumbnailing everything, but we said at the time we wanted a really good manager. Who's the biggest band in the world? Led Zeppelin. All right, let's get hold of Led Zeppelin's manager. And we did, and Paul called him, and and Peter Grant was great. He said, Paul said, oh, well, I'm getting this band together. And Peter said, I know, I've heard it. I mean, what? So I know all about it. The rock and roll industry is a little village, and he knew that he knew all about us, and he came to see us and offered us a recording contract with Swan Song.
First band signed to their label, right? You guys
were
the first. Yeah. Well, that you answered a question I was going to ask, which was, did you have some pre-history with Peter Grant, or it sounds like he knew who you guys all were, and as you say, Paul called him, and that set it in motion. So
no, I mean, I'd never heard of the guy, quite honestly, and you won't believe this, but his band before that was this band that recorded Winchester Cathedral. I mean, it was, I mean, I can't remember the name of the band, but they went on tour. I mean, Peter Grant was this legendary, I mean, he really was a legendary road manager / tour manager, and ultimately a manager. And as I said, in the late 60s, the whole industry was really shoehorned into this area in London, West London, around Oxford Street. And Island Records had an office above Peter Grant's office. We never met him, but he was with a guy called Mickey Most, and they had rack management, and they managed a bunch of different artists. But anyway, long story short, he hooked up with Jimmy, and quite honestly, Zeppelin were originally Jimmy Page and Peter Grant's band. They hired Robert and Bonzo from the Band of Joy, this wonderful band, blues band from the Midlands, and they became the New Yardbirds for a while because the Yardbirds were contracted to do a whole bunch of gigs. And Peter, being the clever guy, said, well, you know what? We'll call this band the New Yardbirds so we can honor these gigs, and then we can become. And it was Keith Moon who came up with Led Zeppelin's name, you know.
I heard that. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the great names in rock came courtesy of one of the great drummers in rock. Yeah.
He says, did he say something like, oh, he'd heard about the band and he said it's gonna go down like a Led Zeppelin?
Yeah, it something like that. It won't get off the ground. It's like a bloody Led Zeppelin. And I don't know who was at the meeting, but it was like, what a great name. And of course it was Lead. And someone said, well, we'll take the A out, and because it just wouldn't be the same now, would it? Lead Zeppelin?
No.
LED, man.
Yeah. So the first record, so the band formed in springish of 73.
Well, no, the final lineup was when Boz came on board October 73. We recorded the album that a couple of months later, and we sort of hit the world in 74. Yeah.
And I'm guessing, I mean, I listen to that record all the time. That's one of the greatest debut records ever made. You know, I'd put that alongside Led Zeppelin 1 and all these. I mean, and then there were many more after that, but in terms of a debut record, it's just, you know, it holds up.
Thank you.
Almost 50. Yeah, absolutely. And I would guess that it sounds like you guys went in the studio and you had all those songs written and arranged and rehearsed and just were able to just, I mean, not to say there wasn't any, you know, creativity in the studio by any means, but that you had all this, you had them all worked out.
You're absolutely right. That's a very good point, because what happened was, while we were waiting and while we were auditioning bass players, we had this sort of 10, 12 songs that, you know, Mick and Paul and, you know, we and myself had written Bad Company, and we just kept doing these songs over and over again with different bass players. And in fact, when Peter Grant first saw us, we didn't have Boz. We had another guy who was kind of hanging around. He was pretty good, but then he disappeared. So what happened was, around November 73, Peter called Paul Rogers and said, look, Headley Grange, Zeppelin have taken some time off. John Paul Jones has got the flu. Headley Grange is nothing's happening. You want to take it for a week or 10 days? We said, hell yeah. And we just dived in. All Zeppelin's gear was there. Bonzo's kit was up in the on the first level in the hall, which is how he got this incredible When the Levee Breaks. They recorded When the Levee Breaks there. So all of Zeppelin's gear was there. And of course, not knowing, I wish I'd taken photos, but you know, we just, you know, what the hell. So we steamed in and we recorded all the basic tracks, I think in about a week, and then 4 days, and then took another 3 or 4 days to mix the album. So we were like, you know, greyhounds chasing a rabbit out of the gate, boom.
Yeah.
We had everything arranged and off we went.
What a great sounding record. I have to read a comment from a friend of mine. Who you might know this guy, Mike Edison. He wrote a book about Charlie Watts called Sympathy for the Drummer, Why Charlie Watts Matters. It's a great book. I'm going to ask him to send you a copy.
I'd love to see it. Yeah.
It's fantastic. But he has this great comment. He said, the 1970s didn't begin until the first Bad Company record dropped.
Wow.
And I think that's
Goodness.
perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so dumb drummer geek question. The count off to Can't Get Enough of Your Love. Is that you, or is that
Yeah, it's me.
it's you?
Because,
Okay.
well, you have to remember that we were spread all over this vast manor house, which is why we got this amazing separation, because not one instrument was in the same room.
Okay.
So I was down in the basement with the kit, and Boz was next door in a boiler room with his little bass rig, and the other guys were upstairs. So I'd say, "Hey, everyone ready? 1, 2." So I counted it off just to get everyone's attention. And I do believe it was the first track that we ever recorded on Bad Co. So there was an air of expectancy about the whole thing.
Yeah.
Here we go, 1, 2, and then gubra, and then in. And then when we got into the mobile, the studio, and we heard the count off, I think Paul Rogers said, "Hey, let's keep it." Little knowing that it would be this sort of iconic,
It's
it's
huge. I
mean,
mean,
John, it was just a question of getting all the bastards together. 1, 2, 3, let's go. Ringo always had a great thing. Whenever, there'd be a break and the musician was like, have a little ciggy or started chatting in the rehearsals, he'd get on the mic, he'd go 2, and we go, oh shit. As if he was counting, it's just a great way of getting everyone together.
Oh, that's I when I do that, my band ignores me. So
Yeah.
But I'm not you or Ringo. But no, but that became like I was in a band that covered that song right after it came out, and that was like one of the more enjoyable parts of the thing was counting it. Just like counting in the band and mimicking your 1, 2, 1, 2, and it's so iconic. It's so iconic. And you made a great point about the separation, because the production of that record, again, I'll say it holds up, almost 50 years later. It's such a great sounding record. I remember listening with headphones and just, that's the word, the separation between the instruments and then the drum kit too. There was such a great, when you go around the toms, the sort of panning effect of that you didn't hear a lot of that, to that level and that quality at that time.
Well, it's when I was talking to I did a couple of 3 tours with Ringo, and we would talk about how back in the day, unfortunately, recording techniques weren't that good. And, you got to remember the first 2 or 3 Beatles albums were recorded on 4 tracks.
Yeah.
And I mean, I use 10 tracks for my kit now. So it's just how they manage to get this. It was just a question of technology not getting in the way of creativity, because as we know, the Beatles, those albums, particularly Rubber Soul and Revolver and Sgt. Pepper, were just incredible. So it was nothing to do with recording techniques. And Ringo's drums suffered because he's such a great drummer, but everything was sort of compressed into this little area, and then you could pan left and right and just hear Paul and Ringo together, and pan the other way, and hear John and George, the guitars. But then, listen, I went to see Love in Vegas a few years ago, and George Martin had remixed all these iconic tracks, and oh my God, the drums were just, it was, I mean, I got quite emotional, because I know that Ringo would have gone, oh, at last you can fucking hear me, because he's such a great drummer. And back in those days, the 60s, not much thought was given that much to the drums. And when I sat behind a mixing console, I made sure that, my drums were heard. And I wanted to hear back what I had put in.
Yeah.
And I think I succeeded,
Absolutely. And so to that point, so like early records, do you remember, were they recorded kind of the way Bonzo's were, with like a lot more room, or were they more close mic'd?
That's a good question. Well, at the time, I didn't really know that much about the magic that room mics can attach to a drum mix.
Mhm.
Until I went to see Jimmy, and he was mixing Coda down in this studio just west of London in the country. And I walked in, and give him a hug, la la la, and he was in the middle of mixing. I forget which track, but he was mixing Bonzo's drums, and they were great. They were Bonzo. I mean, one of the greatest drummers of all time, but they didn't have that, that massive.
Yeah.
So I said, I just sat there, I didn't want to say anything, And then if they're having a break, we're having a ciggy, and I said, "Hey, Jimmy, what? The drums are not quite." He said, "Ah." And he pushed up these two Neumann 80s. I'm not quite sure what they are, but the big room mics.
Yeah.
He put them up to infinity, and there you had that magnificent Bonzo sound. So from that day on, and now in my home recordings, in my home studio, I make sure there's a lovely room mic, because it adds to it. Like I said earlier, you're listening back to what you put in, and without that room mic, it's just a little kit. But and I would say to any drummer out there, always have a good couple of room mics, and you'll sound like JB himself.
Yeah. Well, you always had a great sound, though, whether they were room mics or close mics, or always a great sound. And do you remember, Simon, another sort of drum question, the cymbals that you were using, like on those early records, if were they the Giant Beats or the 2002s or the 602s?
I never. Well, yeah, good question. I'm trying to remember when I switched to pasty. I mean, prior to pasty, I probably used Zildjian, but it was another Bonzo thing again, because he said, "Oh, come on, I got a great deal with pasty. They give you free cymbals." And quite honestly, John, if you blindfolded me, I couldn't tell you a Sabian from a Zildjian I just can't. I'm not that discerning. I've never used very large cymbals. I don't like them, because when they get out of control, you've only got to hit them a little off center, and they start flapping around, and it really screws up. And I don't like them rigid. I don't like them screwed down, so that the ride doesn't move. There's got to be a little bit of give. My point is that I never use larger than 18, maybe a 20-inch ride, and always a 16 crash.
Yeah.
It's just, you want to hit something that's not like an anvil, bloody hell, what was that? But you want to have a nice, a little bit of sway in the, but not where it kicks, the stick. So I've always, I've used paste. And I went to the paste factory in Switzerland. If you're a member of their fraternity, you got to go. And it's the noisiest factory visit you will ever make. And
sure, yeah.
Because they show you the rivets and how they make it under the drills and la la la. But right at the end, there's the biggest gong, the famous pasty gong, and every drummer has hit it. And they said when Bonzo hit it, the whole building shook.
I believe it.
I believe it too.
Well, I asked that because you just made that point. I can hear on the records a real separation between what sounds like a 16 and an 18-inch crash. The 16 being that higher, gets right out of the way fast, a really nice fast crash, and then a more sort of medium pitched, sort of more full-bodied 18. And I just wondered if what the series, if they were like the giant, what the Bonzo used the Giant Beats and all that stuff. But
I don't know, quite honestly. I mean, I went through that rude phase, they had the rude cymbals. I just like them. I mean, I like whether they're 2002s or rude or whatever they are. I like paste cymbals, and that's just it.
Yeah. Well, you always had a great, drum and cymbal sound on record. So, and pretty much into the 70s, you used the same setup, pretty much same Ludwig kit, same.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
I,
sounds.
I, I had Ludwig. Um, I flirted with Remo. You know, Remo came out with drums, and as much as I love their heads, I didn't think their drums were really up to the standard of the established people, like, you know, like Ludwig or Tamer or whatever, Yamaha. Um, so I flirted with Remo for a year or two, and then I got a call from John Good, DW, and I wasn't really sponsored by anyone, so I didn't have any particular allegiance to Ludwig. They'd given me drums over the years for nothing, and they were great, you know. But every now and again, I just wanted to change. I've always had a Gretsch kit, and thanks to dear Charlie, who I grew up admiring enormously. He was the first drummer I knew that had a Gretsch kit, and I went out and got one. But it really wasn't roadworthy and it was quite valuable. You know, Heyman they were what I call cheap and cheerful. I mean, they were great. They were great drums, and I wished I had the kit now. But they really weren't. They weren't class like Gretsch. Gretsch had that lovely solidity to them, and the snare drums were beautiful. The whole thing about Gretsch were great, but it was too valuable to take on the road. Yeah. I didn't have a lot of money back then, and so they always stayed in my studio. So then I got a call from John Good, and he said, "Hey, you know, we like you. We'd love to have you in the DW family." And that was clever, a clever bit of marketing, because when you say, "Oh, okay," he said, "Well, we can't pay you anything, but we'll give you free drums." And that's all right, because as you know, DW are quite expensive. Yeah. And I've been with them ever since, you know, over, God, nearly 30 years now.
They're beautiful drums too, and
yeah,
and great people. Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. I'm going to just see if there are any questions that I might have missed here, Simon. And I know we're getting close to the hour, so I won't keep you on with these.
We're okay questions for another 10, 15 minutes.
Good. Let's see. Oh, Yard. I was going to, there was a comment from Yard on here, who just, of course, said proper.
Yeah.
He's a big fan of yours, as you well know.
Well, I'm a fan of his. Yeah. He was so nice.
He's a top man. You know, before you and I met, I've known Yard a long time, and we've had many conversations about you, and he would always acknowledge you as not only the great drummer that you are, but just the great person. He'd say, you know, if everybody was like Simon Kirke, you know, my life would be so much easier, you know.
That's just, lovely.
Anthony had another question, Anthony Cucina, who always has great questions. What drummers inspired you the most when you were growing up? And that's a great question to ask, because
wow. It's quite a few, actually. The top of the heap for me, the biggest influence on me was Al Jackson Jr. And it's funny, I just came back from Atlanta, saw the Stones, and met up with Steve Jordan, and he's got one of Al Jackson's drums. I was so envious. And we share a love of Al Jackson. There's something about Al Jackson, and I would urge any drummer out there, whether you're beginning or you're in your career or whatever, in the middle of your career, or if you're just starting out, play anything with Al Jackson on it, because he's a pocket drummer, a very high-pitched snare, like Charlie had. But he had this wonderful, he played with a jazz grip, but he had this incredible backbeat. And I think one of the best examples of his drumming was at the Midnight Hour with Wilson Pickett. You listen to that backbeat, and it is just, and Down in the Valley, Otis Redding, listen to those two, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So Al would be, you know, my number one influence. Roger Hawkins with the Muscle Shoals guys, he just sadly passed away. Lovely drummer. Lee Bonham.
Did you know?
No, I never met him. I never met him. Actually, you know what? I did, and it's been so long. I actually, when I was with Free, we did a package tour, of island artists, and it was Free, Traffic, and John Martin. And Steve Winwood and Jim Capaldi brought in the Muscle Shoals rhythm section to play with Traffic. Yeah. So I did. I got to meet Roger, but we only sort of met in airports and backstage. But he showed me the benefit of playing with that jazz grip. I mean, he hardly, I'm one of these flailers, He was this gentle, but he had this whip, like Charlie, that lovely jazz grip, but he whipped it back. So Roger Hawkins, Levon was a lovely drummer. Another one who played with the jazz grip.
That's right. Yeah.
Charlie, for sure, a big influence on me. And then no influence, but I admired the hell out of him, Buddy Rich. I mean, Buddy's solos, God.
Yeah.
I mean, he swung.
Exactly. You even if he wasn't your favorite drummer, you have to just marvel at his technique. It's just
stunning. And Ringo, dear Ringo. Anyone with a pocket and feel. I'm probably missing people out, but those would be the big five for me. Who had influence. Obviously, I love John, but he wasn't an influence on me as such. But I was a huge fan of his. Stuart Copeland, another great drummer. Nico McBrain, Richie Haywood with Little Feat. Oh my God!
Absolutely, yeah.
He's one of the great underrated drummers of all time, because I've gone back to Little Feat now. I'm listening to some of early Richie Haywood, and it sounds like two guys playing. He's so good.
Amazing. And I'm guessing too, Jeff Porcaro was a big influence. Yeah, I mean, he's in that same group of guys you're talking about.
Wonderful drummer. Yeah, there's so many.
Yeah.
I never met Jeff. My God, I would love to give him a hug, because his playing was just sublime. Wonderful.
But as we said, as I said at the beginning, and you've had that same influence on a lot of players, Mike, not just me, but our friend Stan Lynch, when we had that other call a few weeks ago, Stan was beside himself to be, and he called me afterward when we after he got offline, he called me and he thanked me he said, I didn't belong in that group with all those people. And I said, Stan, come on, man, what are you talking about?
You do.
Yeah, I know. He's so funny.
John, we're just, as musicians, we're just conduits, we're passing it on. Whoever was influenced by me will be passing it on to their kids and future generations. We're just passing it on, and I'm honored that people feel influenced by me, because it's I can't really expound on that. It's an honor to be able to pass something on. And people say, I grew up listening to your drumming and I love it, and it just makes me very emotional that people say those things. So thank you.
You're sincerely welcome. And I'm going to just ask you one more question as we close in. Mike, I hope I'm pronouncing Mike's last name correctly, Pieski. What type of snare drums are your favorites for recording or live? Wood, brass, etc.
Well, that's an easy one, because I've got the same drum. Let me go and get it.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's a good question, Mike. It's going to prompt a great answer.
This is a 1972 brass Black Beauty brass shell.
Oh my gosh, look at that.
Ludwig. And it's been, and I'm sorry, John Good. There's just something about this, and it's been on every Bad Company song that was ever played.
That's the drum. That is the drum. Okay.
I really, it's just something about certain drums. It's like any instrument. It's personal. So yeah, 72 Black Beauty. I have a case for it just for that. It comes with me. If ever I go on the road with Bad Company, unfortunately, just to keep costs down, I don't take my kits. I
Yeah.
rent DW kits wherever I go, and they're so damn good that I know it's going to be fine. But
Sure.
that comes with me, and I give it to my roadie. I said, if you ever lose this, you better leave town.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, you answered I was going to ask if that stays home, but you take that.
I
That's your
do,
drum.
I
That's,
do,
yeah.
and I'm nervous as hell when I put it on the carousel or give it to the baggage guy at the airport. And I said, look after this, brother, because my whole sex life is in there. You better take care of this.
That's fantastic. I assumed it was a Ludwig, the classic superphonic 6.5 by 14, but a Black Beauty makes sense because it's got so much character to it. It's
I just wanted to add to that list of drummers, not because he's one of my best friends, but Chad Smith.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you say, "Oh my God, I wish I'd mentioned." Oh shit! But
Yeah.
Chad and I played with Chad at Berkeley College of Music. We did a clinic together, and it's like I've always said, it's like pissing into Niagara Falls, playing with Chad because he's like an octopus. He's like got 8 arms, and he's got feel. He's got taste. He's solid, and he's a beautiful guy. I love him.
Yeah, me too.
And but my God, it's like riding a stallion without a saddle. Play, Playing alongside Chad, he's great. I love him.
I would add him to that list of, I mean, I think people know how great he is, but I think he probably isn't acknowledged enough for
Yeah,
being right because he's got such a big personality. I think people know him as this, you know,
right.
his big person, but he is such a great drummer. I mean, a really,
Oh,
really great drummer.
no question. He's just, there's so many guys that you think,
Yeah.
oh my God. And Greg Bissonette, he did a drum solo on Ringo's tour. Oh my God. It
Yeah.
was like suddenly all that jazz stuff came out, and we did this thing, drum together. 100 drummers doing that
Yes.
Beatles
Yeah.
song come together. Greg sends me I don't read drum music, but Greg sends me these charts, left, right, left, left. I'm going, shit, Greg, I can't. There's more movements in this than the Swiss watch. I can't do this.
I know.
And
I
he's
know.
and
I can read a little bit and he'll send me stuff and he'll go, come on, you can read that. Come on. I'm like, Greg, you need to go slow with me. I went to his house a couple of years ago when I was out in LA and in his little studio, he's got two kits facing each other and we played
uh-huh.
and it was the most fun, Simon. We played to a bunch of Beatles songs
He
and
loves
then
it.
he wrote this part out. Yeah. And he said something, recognize this? He said, what Beatles song is this? And it's the Phil Ringo plays. Oh gosh, I'm going to ruin the whole story by not. But he had written out this Phil that Ringo, and I said I can't. And then once he played it, I said okay, I can see some of
Yeah,
it. Yeah,
yeah.
funny
I got
stuff.
to mention also Vinny. That for me, the big the jazz rock drummers and Vinny Colaiuta.
Yeah,
Oh,
sure. Yeah,
Vinny's
monster drummer. Yeah,
a monster. And Dave Weckl. I mean, you go on to any YouTube of Dave Weckl, and it's that form of drumming is completely impressive. It impresses the hell out of me. I can't make 7/4 swing. I can't even play 7/4. I'm probably good to 5/4. That's about it for me. But Vinny is just and people, other drummers, other musicians, Sting, who I know pretty well. He mentions Vinny, and they go, "Oh my God, Vinny's just ah."
yeah.
Go to Jeff Beck live at Ronnie Scott's
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
watch Vinny Colaiuta, and it's just my God. So I got to give a hats off to Vinny, and of course Steve Gadd. I mean, Steve
Yeah.
is just Steve is
Another.
another. The
Yeah.
more I listen, I mean, the more I stay on the air, the more drummers I'm going to come up with. So I think we better draw a curtain over this pretty quickly.
No, I think you should feel proud that you've no one's going to be disappointed that you've left anyone off the list because you've named all the really great guys and um, you know
Thank you, man.
really fabulous and yourself included because when it comes to when it comes to playing 4/4, I don't know that many of those guys can touch you. And I mean that, you know,
Thanks.
and I think everyone watching would agree with that. So,
Well, thank you very much, Joe.
yeah. But Simon, thank you so much. It's been such an honor. Thank you for responding to my email back, you know, a month or so ago when we set up the Charlie chat. That was so kind of you then, and agreeing to do this. It's you're exactly what I had heard about you from everybody. All our mutual friends have said. So thank you.
Thank you, my friend. And anytime, you know, you want to chat again, I'll be here. Just let me know.
Sounds fantastic. I look forward to it. I will take you up on that. Yar says, fantastic interview, fabulous interview, and thanks for the mention. So if you'll stay with me for just 1 second, Simon,
Sure.
I'll end the stream and then we'll say goodbye in the
Okay.
in the room. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Big hand for Simon Kirke. Wow, what a treat. Thank you so much, Simon.